Well, welcome very much, everybody, to coming to our family event, Fringe, Family Hubs event, and we're never quite sure who's going to turn up. And we had visions of sort of about three people, so it's very welcoming to see you all. And it's, of course, extremely important subject. It's a rather unusual format, but we tried this last year, and it seemed to work quite well, and people could walk in and out. I'm Lord Farmer, a backbench peer. I was a metals trader most of my life, but have got involved in politics in my old age, really, and particularly in policies to strengthen families. The Ministry of Justice actually asked me to carry out 2 reviews on how to strengthen male and female prisoners' family ties to prevent reoffending and intergenerational crime. Prisoners who receive family visits are 39% less likely to reoffend than those who don't. It's the most effective rehabilitation pathway by a long way, and yet you'll find ministers often talk about the 2 others, which are employment and education, and their rehabilitation level is 10%. This is 39%. Relationships are important. I also co-founded the Family Hubs Network to drive better support for all families who need it. Just give you a few stats. Why do families need it? Those who experience family breakdown when aged 18 or younger, 1, over twice as likely to experience homelessness, twice as likely to be in trouble with the police or spend time in prison, almost twice as likely to experience educational underachievement, almost twice as likely to experience alcoholism, almost twice as likely to experience teen pregnancy, and also to experience mental health issues. And that's just some of the stats. So you can see family breakdown is a huge elephant, I think, in our society, which is ignored. Since 2007, I beg your pardon, I've gone switch the page over. Family Hubs have been promoted since 2007, as I was saying. The groundbreaking Breakthrough Britain report, written for the incoming Conservative government by fellow co-founder Dr. Samantha Callan, who's here today, supporting me, said reducing poverty would be impossible without stemming the tide of family breakdown. Breakthrough Britain, her report recommended a network of local family hubs to deliver systematically early intervention to boost outcomes for all age children. Crucially, this should include relationships and other support parents need to help stabilize families wherever possible. When both parents raise their children together in a low-conflict context, there are many blessings to the family unit, to community, and to the wider society as a whole. Melissa Kearney, University of Maryland economist, has just published The Two-Parent Privilege, How the Decline in Marriage Has Increased Inequality and Lowered Social Mobility, and What We Can Do About It. She urges policymakers to foster a norm of 2-parent homes for children by talking about their benefits. Boys' outcomes are particularly sensitive to time spent with their parents. Hence, we have today here Nav Mirza, who's to describe the need to support the whole family, including after parents have separated, and ensure fathers, not just mothers, know the vital role they can play in their children's flourishing. Since 2007, family hubs have been slowly developing across the country, and now, a mere 16 years later, they're officially government policy, with 130 million going into their development across England. 87 out of 150 upper-tier local authorities have been drawn into 2 family hubs transformation funds so they can, A, better integrate their family support, connecting providers from the public, voluntary and private sectors to work with the whole family to resolve problems and transform outcomes for children. B, to ensure better access to that family support. And finally, embed a relational approach in all they do. UCL's Centre for Longitudinal Studies describes good relationships as a health asset, and over 90% of GPs are seeing people about their problematic relationships. but almost 70% feel ill-equipped to advise them and refer people on. Good relational skills and less family breakdown are also essential for the elusive productivity uptick the Chancellor is calling for. Better integration of services through family hubs improves relationships between the public sector, their partners, and boosts productivity. Catherine Barker, at the end here, will talk about this in her remarks. And after we go back to Westminster, I and others must ensure this aspect of Family Hub's policy makes its way to Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. Connection, access and relationships are the three pillars of the Department for Education's approach. And as the Minister may elaborate on further, but as this set of principles must also be applied across benefit for the benefit of families. For example, the Children's Commissioner's Family Review emphasised that every government department should connect and work together to develop family strengthening policies. Many say government is irredeemably full of silos, but the Supporting Families cross-government programme pioneered a way of working that helped eliminate much duplication and inefficiency. That must be emulated in how we further implement family hubs. Family hubs could and should provide access points for delivering a much wider range of state-funded services, including DWP's Reducing Parental Conflict programme and advice on child maintenance, and the MOJ's private family law or prisoners' family support. The Health and Social Care Department needs to ensure its new statutory guidance is followed. This stresses the need to integrate family hubs in delivery of mental and physical health services across childhood, especially where conditions have a major psychosocial component. Dr. Mike McKean will argue for this from the front line of child health. Central government cannot expect local authorities to better integrate support and join the dots for hard-pressed families unless they are inspired by and act upon the same ambition. A good point at which to introduce the first speaker on our panel, and everyone will be talking for 4 or 5 minutes or so to enable interaction and questions later on. We're very pleased and privileged to have the new Minister for Families and Children, David Johnston, that he was willing and able to join us despite a flood of other invitations. A formal Social Mobility Commissioner and CEO of the Social Mobility Foundation, he's written about the importance of families and parenting to children's outcomes. So for us, it was an inspired appointment in the recent mini-shuffle. So may I hand over now to David Johnston.
Thank you very much, Lord Farmer, and thank you for all the work that you've done on this area with Samantha and others, because it's made a huge difference to the government's thinking in this area and will continue to do so. I'm not going to speak for very long, as Lord Farmer said, but this programme, the Family Hubs programme, is a key part of £300 million that we're putting into Start for Life and family support. And as I think most of you know, family hubs will have a sort of core set of focus areas: parent and infant mental health, infant feeding, parent support, establishing parent carer panels, and we hope that they will serve as a sort of one-stop shop for people to be able to access the support that they need, the services that they need, up to the age of 19, or in the case of children with special educational needs, up to the age of 25. And as some of you may know, before I went into politics in 2019, I had never done anything in politics before. I had never been a candidate, a councillor, never been an advisor, nothing. I had run charities for disadvantaged children and young people with a slightly different focus, but it's impossible to ignore, anytime you're working with children and young people, the importance of families and the importance of parenting. And although that my predecessor, Claire Coutinho, was doing a great job, and she left me big shoes to fill. But we were both working together before she got that job on this area, because we felt that for too long, parenting and the importance of family had been neglected, when some studies say that 80% of what happens to us is nothing to do with school. It's all to do with what happens at home. And through the charities I ran, you saw where family support worked and where it didn't. And through the mentoring I did, I mentored someone who was raised by a kinship carer, which is also something that's in this brief. And I want to do more to promote kinship care, because it's such a good alternative to, I mean, clearly children in care homes, but also to adoption and fostering. The outcomes for kinship care are better than all of those things, even though adoption and foster carers do a fantastic job. And that stands to reason that if people can, it's not always the case, but if people are able to be with their family members, the chances are they will have better outcomes. And my sort of thinking about this is also partly informed by Geoffrey Canada and the Harlem Children's Zone, and what he has tried to do there to give an entire area. And obviously my colleague Danny Kruger attempted a form of this with the West London Children's Zone, to try and put in one place all the support that people need, and constantly thinking about, for children, what creates escape velocity. You know, what's the thing you can do that will propel the child for the rest of their life? And clearly the 0 to 5 period and early years are very important. But you have to do things at a later stage as well, which is why it's so important that family hubs will go to the age of 19, albeit we expect the core focus will be on children at a younger age. And over and above, because I know people always want to know sort of how the new minister's thinking about these things, over and above what we have set out for family hubs to have better outcomes for children and for their families, there's really 3 things I'm thinking about within this. One is to elevate the importance of parenting and families. And one of the things that Claire and I used to have the discussion about was how, parenting, governments have tried different things on parenting, but it still largely remained this taboo subject where you might get attacked from the right for wanting a nanny state that wants to bring up children, or attacked from the left for demonizing what parents are doing. Attacked in both cases by journalists and others who are doing exactly the right things for their own children. And we need to spread that knowledge. So one thing for me is to elevate the importance of parenting and family networks, and that where we can keep children with their families, and it's appropriate to do so, we should do so. The second thing is to build networks for parents, because actually one of the key things that makes a difference is whether a parent has other parents that they can interact with to help them understand. There's someone I know who's just become a new mum, and like anybody who's just become a new mum, she has no idea about all the things she's supposed to be doing when she first starts. And thankfully, her mum is able to help her with those things. But as many people have said, there is no manual, there is no tests like learning to drive a car. And we need to build networks for parents so that they're not isolated, because where they are isolated, we often see some of the problems that we've had. And the third, because my whole focus of my career before becoming an MP was disadvantaged children, is to make sure that family hubs work for disadvantaged children. There's a big debate about Sure Start, whether it was effective, whether it wasn't. And broadly speaking, at the start, it disproportionately benefited middle-class families. Then it was better targeted and in more disadvantaged areas, so it helped more disadvantaged children and families. But this has got to be a key focus for family hubs. Not the only focus. They're not just for disadvantaged parents and children, but those are often the families that most need support, and they want that support but don't know sometimes how to get it. And that's what I think family hubs have got to have a real focus on. So I look forward to the discussion, but thank you very much for now.
Through this, can't I? Yeah. Thank you, Minister. That was good news, I think, by and large. I'd like now to introduce Dr. Mike McKean. He's clinical lead for Child Health and Wellbeing Network Northeast and North Cumbria ICS, Vice President, Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. He's worked as a paediatrician specialising in respiratory disorders at the Great North Children's Hospital in Newcastle for 20 years. During this time, he's been Clinical Director of Children's Services, developed and led the Northeast and North Cumbrian Child Health and Wellbeing Network, and its Clinical Advisor for the Northeast and Yorkshire. So, Dr. McKean, may I hand over to you?
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me okay. So it's an absolute privilege to be here. And back in my own stomping ground, I was born in Manchester, so I feel like I'm returning home. You know, kind of I'm thinking about integrated care a lot these days, both in... Down there? Is that better? Oh, I can shout. I won't try my fake Geordie accent on you, though. I'm thinking a lot about integrated care. It seems to be a topic that everybody wants to talk about, and do we really understand it? And as it's starting to roll out, how can we best use it? And of course, family hubs are probably an exemplar of integration of care and how this could work. So to try and illustrate the why, first of all, why could integrated care be so important for children and young people? I'll give you a little case study. This was from last year, and it's a true story. One of my specialty areas is wheezing children with asthma, and particularly young children. And you probably know that young children who wheeze often have lots of different trigger factors to them. It may be smoking at home. It may be living in poor housing, mouldy housing. We've heard a bit about beds as well, and mouldy beds. And the environment really can have a big impact on that. So this child, who was only 3 years old, had been into hospital, seeing our emergency department, which was fairly clogged up, 6 times, and then eventually got flagged to me. And we started working on the child and inhalers and talking to mum. And we realised that this was a mum who was under incredible pressure. She had 3 children. She was a single mum. And she lived in a very famous part of Newcastle called Byker. If you remember Byker Grove, just around the corner from where Ant and Dec are, I don't think they're there anymore. But they sort of grew up in that area, or certainly filmed in that area anyway. And it's a tough area to live in Byker Grove, although it's got a fantastic community spirit. So there's me and my pals sending this child back out on inhalers, getting them better again, off they go again, and they come back again. And I suddenly heard through a different mechanism, had some management responsibilities then, that the local authority had a year ago started an initiative in Byker to try and help mums stop smoking. It's quite tough to do, to try and ensure that children who were not getting to school or late to school were getting up and getting to school, to try and ensure that they had good access to their GP and the services that were there, and to be very mobile. And it just struck me suddenly, why didn't I know about this? Why was I completely oblivious to this? So my pals have been sending this child out for the last year, not knowing that there was a service locally that could really mobilise and support this family. So of course we got onto the phone straight away. And that's just a little illustration of why sometimes things don't work. Systems, different organisations may not talk to each other, or if they do, they may not have the right intelligence to be able to have that sort of in-depth conversations. They may not know each other. Relationships between organisations, relationships between workers are crucial to making something work. You have to know who you're speaking to so that you can speak with authority. So that's an example of why integrated care is important. In parallel to this, we've been thinking about integrated care for some time. So a few years ago, understanding that we needed to do this better, I was privileged to set up and lead and help develop our ICS's first child health and wellbeing network. And this was a really new step for us to not just think about health, because that's what I've always done. It's about getting sick kids better, and it's the most important thing, isn't it? But to actually start thinking, what's brought them into hospital? Why are they in hospital? And what am I sending them back out again for? What services are out there? what's the environment they're living in, and what's happening out there. So our network is now starting to connect to all sorts of services, and that includes the voluntary sector, but importantly, our nurseries, our schools, our educationalists as well. And it was like a lightning kind of moment for us when we realised that those people out there working for children and families want exactly the same thing as my nurses and my fellow doctors want for children. Exactly the same outcome. We want the happiest, most robust, healthiest children to be able to grow and to enjoy this wonderful world we live in, and to probably change it, and change it for the better, and have a great time, and grow up as these robust, healthy adults that we all need for our future as well. Within this, there was a couple of models I just want to highlight. One is called our Zone West and our Zone Borough models. Zone West, because it was in the west end of Newcastle, and Zone Borough is Middlesbrough. And we started a model thinking about how do we connect services. This was before family hubs. How do we connect? So we put a key worker, a social worker, if you like, a youth worker, if you like, but for primary age school children, because we wanted to get in early, and started to work with families who were perhaps just under the radar of social services. Families who were experiencing some difficulties, often frequent flyers, if you like, at the emergency department, often with slightly poor school attendance and struggling, often with a parent who may be struggling as well. And those key workers have worked with them and started to develop networks into the local resources, to the voluntary sector that's there, to the scouts, to the clubs that are available, and within the schools, most importantly. And through trust, they've been able to help these families access what's going on in the community and to do it very successfully. It's been so successful, we're now spreading it to Middlesbrough as well, in some areas that I would say are some of the most deprived areas in our country. And it's starting to make a difference too. For example, in Middlesbrough, we now have the Royal Ballet going in and teaching some of our most deprived kids how to move. Now, that would never have happened before. So this is an interesting thought about integrated care. But of course, to do it at scale, you need something special to do that at scale. Because it's all right doing small pilot projects, but you need to be able to scale it up. And this is where family hubs, we're going to hear more about, maybe the tool that could start to really do this at scale. So I'm very interested in family hubs. We want to watch it very carefully. My final thought about integrated care comes to my pet subject of asthma too. You know, we have too many kids with asthma coming to our emergency department, and sadly, children still die from asthma in our country. We have got the worst outcome for asthma deaths in the whole of Europe. It's something that I, as a respiratory paediatrician, asthma specialist, am ashamed of. I've not been able to crack it. But we're starting to make progress now. And that's because we have looked at it through a different lens, a lens of integration and thinking, no longer can me as the great big specialist who knows what to do with asthma tell someone what to do and off you go and do it. It's more now a conversation with our schools, with our scouts, with our football clubs, with the local nurseries as well, very importantly, and most importantly with children and young people themselves. It's getting mobile and getting our nurses to work into those areas that they congregate, the youth clubs, the schools, and to try and give good education. And this integrated approach has now been adopted nationally, and we're starting to see an impact. Less kids coming to our emergency department with asthma for 3 years running now, because we've got mobile and we've gone out to where children are. I'd finally like to say kind of why is this important? And, you know, this seems obvious to me as a paediatrician, but I think there's something that binds us. Why are children and young people so important? Why is it so important to get this right? So many of us in this room will be parents. Some of you, like me, might be just a recent grandparent. And you might have picked up a little baby, your own child maybe, or grandchild, and held them. And that first time you do that, I can tell you will fall, or will have fallen, deeply in love with that person. Or you might be an aunt and an uncle who's playing with a little niece and nephew and picking them up and swinging them around. And you will absolutely do anything for that young person to give them the best chance in life. Yeah? That binds us all. And it's really important. We have a choice as adults. We have a choice in our society to decide, do we put our effort into children and young people? And do we do it wholeheartedly or not? The second point I would say, finances. It makes sense. It makes financial sense to prevent children becoming unwell, unhealthy, the mental health problems, the physical health problems that they will get later in their life. It makes absolute financial sense on every single level. And thirdly, why should we put our effort and our focus into children and young people? Because it's good fun. Children and young people will light up our lives, will give us the biggest smiles. They'll also cause us to scratch our brows an awful lot too. But they're an incredibly important part of our society. I would argue the most vulnerable part of our society. We should not neglect them. Family hubs might be a way forwards. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. McKean. That was inspirational in many respects. I now want to introduce you to Nav Mirza. He's chief executive of a charity called Dads Unlimited. He's a founder of it. He's a single dad, and after a fairly tough time after his divorce, subsequently looking after his son as the primary carer, he set up Dads Unlimited. He wants to make life easier for dads in his situation and provide the advice, support and community he never had. So he brings to Dads Unlimited his vision, his values, his wealth of experience from helping to set up the Independent Police Complaints Commission and from other strategic, tactical and operational roles across central government and the NHS. So now it's over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay? Brilliant. Thank you. So, as Lord Farmer says, my name is Nav, and I set up Dads Unlimited charity back 6.5 years ago. I went through a torrid divorce back in 2013, where it started out as any normal divorce would, but descended very quickly into quite high levels of parental conflict, to the point where I was raising concerns to the school, the police, and everyone about the harm my son was coming to. Sadly, for 18 months I was ignored. Nobody wanted to talk to me, nobody replied to it in my letters. In fact, it got to the point where I was threatened with arrest because I was told, "You're making this stuff up. You need to stop." I decided to take my life that night. Thankfully, I failed. But it went on, and it got worse to the point where I was stopped from seeing my son, and I was still raising awareness of the difficulties that he was going through, even though I was trying so hard to champion his voice. And I tried again and failed to take my own life. Until 3-4 weeks later, I had a knock on the door, and a social worker said, "We've looked into your case again, Nav. You've been right for 18 months. Your son has been harmed, and we're very sorry." I then realised I needed to give up work and become a full-time single dad. And I thought things would get easier, but they didn't. Being a single father is a very, very, very lonely world. There is no contact with my friends, they were all at work. There was no support, there were no dad and kids clubs. There was absolutely nothing for me. I took my son to school, picked him up from school. Nobody invited me around for a coffee afterwards. All I had was me on my own, every day, day in, day out. So I come to you today with a different lens. I realised then I need to do something about this. I could have easily have got a job or tried to do something that was completely a world away from this. But I realised actually men are in crisis, fathers are in crisis, and we need to do something to help them. The Minister said earlier about networks, community support, etc. I can't tell you how rubbish fathers are at creating their own community. And I can't tell you how rubbish they are at coming up with ideas that's not McDonald's, that's not bowling, and that's not cinema. So I wanted to do something completely different and completely change the dynamic of this. And so I set up Dads Unlimited because I also didn't want another father to go through what I went through and think suicide was a tangible option. Because it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be a society that just because we have family breakdown, that the father thinks to himself, I have to go through the family court process, and this is very difficult. I can't see my children. This is too expensive. I'm going to kill myself, which is where I was. So I set Dads Unlimited up to try to help and bring a male lens, a father lens to families, to family breakdown, but more importantly, parenting. I learned very quickly that we don't value fathers at the parenting table. We don't say, you've got something to give, you've got something to share, you have values, behaviours, ethics, attitudes that your children can benefit from. And I wanted to do something about that. So Dads Unlimited, we work with fathers across the country, helping them create communities, helping them create support. We mentor them, we give them mental health support, we give them a family court support. And we are the only charity in the country that has a fixed fee scheme for legal representation in court, so there's no litigants in persons. Because we work very closely with the National Health Service and the Public Health, and we know 2 or 3 of the biggest suicide risk factors are family breakdown, loss of contact with children, and debt. For those of you who have been through family breakdown with a lawyer, trust me, you need a separate mortgage to get through it. But DU does something about that. And we think that working with these fathers, the Family Hub gives us an opportunity to engage with fathers in a family-inclusive way, in a father-inclusive way. You've got to understand that fathers feel judged. They feel like they're going to be judged on their parenting skills, on what they're doing, on how they're doing it. And so Family Hubs give us the opportunity, and we've worked very hard with the Kent Family Hubs in developing fathers inclusive practice to say, make sure you've got some men around as employees as well. Don't just put them in a children's centre. Make sure that you're talking to them in a trauma-informed way, because trust me, I know from experience, when you're talking to professionals, I was afraid. And so with the professionals inside Family Hubs, we've trained them to say, work with these fathers in a way so they're not afraid of you. Because if they're not afraid, they will open up and they will say, can you help me, please? Any parent going through family breakdown has to remember this, and the system must remember this. They are vulnerable. And if you look at them as vulnerable, you're going to treat them differently. We see approximately 850 to 900 fathers a year. 53.7% of the fathers we look after want to kill themselves because of parental conflict. And therefore that raises the risk of fatherless children. Because these men are lonely. But again, Family Hubs can help break that loneliness and hopelessness. Not only that, there is an opportunity for early intervention. God, if someone had, through my difficulties, intervened at a very, very early stage, my son would not have been harmed. But Family Hubs can give us that opportunity. It's the change that we have been waiting for. So to get that early intervention, to reduce parental conflict, support transitional arrangements from 2-parent families to a 1-parent family is almost the nirvana we're looking for. The numbers of single-parent children at the moment is really high. And we've got to do something to support those children. So this is a phenomenal opportunity. But it needs all of us to contribute, raise awareness, and make sure that everyone understands Family Hubs isn't the silver bullet that's going to work now. It's going to take time. We have to work together and coalesce around every single statutory agency around the Family Hub to make sure that health, law and order, education, charities, the voluntary, other members of the voluntary sector, all sections are in there doing the best they can for those children and for those parents. I often say in the things I say when I speak around about what we do, family breakdown seen through the eyes of a child is nothing less than a tragedy. It is the difference between what was and what will never be. I've spoken to so many young people give them a magic wand, they would want mum and dad back together again, regardless of whether they're happier separately. But that's the thing. These children just need some support because they don't want mum and dad to split up. So we've got to work as a society to make family breakdown, make single parents much more appropriate and compassionate, and treat these parents and children with kindness. I often think to myself, you know, if there was a bit more kindness in my own personal situation, would I have gone down the road I went down? I don't know. But I'd like to think my team at my charity do. We treat these people with kindness and compassion, because that's the bit that's missing. We really can do something here, and we really can make a difference to these kids, because we can improve their outcomes. There was an old strategy back in, I think, 2016, the Helping Troubled Families strategy. I'm sure some of you already know that. Parental conflict in there, the importance of fathers and role models, positive male role models is in there. But more importantly, there was something in there about we need to improve outcomes for children of separated parents, because their mental health outcomes, social mobility, academic performance is all linked to the way that family breaks down. And I will also add this, and this is a bit of a new thing that my charity is working on. We know about the Andrew Tate phenomenon, and we know about the noise that's coming from that sector. Do you know what? We've done some focus work with some focus groups with young people around 14, 15 with these boys. Actually, they're beginning to fall down that Andrew Tate road because they feel like they're being forgotten. But hey, do you not think the family hubs could do something about that? To philosophically get in there and understand what is making these boys become disenfranchised? I personally think family hubs gives us opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And it will be a travesty if we waste this, if we don't do more and invest in these family hubs with time, patience and investment. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much, Nav. That was great. Catherine. Catherine, who is Head of Development, Family Hubs Network, and probably knows more people from local authorities than the rest of us put together, actually.
Just balanced a coffee cup here. It looks a bit lethal. Anyway, can you hear me? Yeah,
We can
great.
now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. I'm really excited to speak to you today. I spend my days talking to local authorities about family hub policy and how they're implementing it, how they're reacting to it, what impact it's having in their area. So it's a great opportunity to update you on what's going on. We are seeing councils across England developing family hub plans, from Cornwall to Cumbria, from South Tyneside to Suffolk. It's very exciting to see what's going on. In my role, as part of the Family Hubs Network, we help councils grasp the vision and the opportunity. And so this does give us an excellent vantage point from which to see how they're reacting and what they're doing with this opportunity. So you won't be surprised to hear that councils are very much welcoming government funding. They are very happy to be able to have money to spend on services to support families, to give younger children the best start for life. But what you're less likely to be aware of is the wider impact that Family Hubs policy is having on councils. Significantly, this includes councils that have not been eligible for the first wave of funding, yet they too are introducing a family hub approach. So what's going on? Why are they jumping up and down when they're not being given any money to do it? What we're finding is that many councils have seized on the family hub concept with both hands, because of the opportunity it presents to transform how they help families through working together better, through that joined up approach. And it's this thinking which is making a massive difference on the ground. I've spoken during my time talking to local authorities with family support workers and early years practitioners, and they sometimes confide that when demand is very high and capacity feels stretched, it can be very tempting to pull up the drawbridge and avoid collaborating with other sectors and teams, to say, I'm really sorry, we just don't have the capacity to work with you. But a family hub approach turns this on its head, asserting that greater collaboration actually increases capacity and cost effectiveness, as well as getting better outcomes for children and families. And this isn't just a theory, it's a proven approach demonstrated by innovating councils such as Essex, Doncaster, the Isle of Wight, and not far from here, Salford, who've been working this way for at least 5 years. So although the funding is new, the way of working is not. And we are only a couple of years into this new approach, and it's going to take time to really reach the potential that it offers. Many councils are therefore really energised and embracing not only the system change that they're being encouraged to take on, but the wider cultural change that's so important for cross-sector partners to come together. And I think rather than delving into that in great detail here, I'd sum it up in the way that Essex do when they say it's services without walls. A culture which prioritises supporting families to overcome their problems, where practitioners focus on meeting the need, not just thinking, well, what services can I offer, but actually thinking, well, I know someone else who can perhaps help here. Asking the question, if not me, then who? So, what innovations are we seeing? I can tell you that we can see quite a few local authorities thinking outside the box. How can we connect up, join up with other services around us to make a difference? So I'm just going to talk you through a few examples. So for example, in Hillingdon, in the London Borough of Hillingdon, they were thinking, well, how can we actually create places where families can access help easily? We can't afford lots of new buildings and places to attract families. That's too much of an investment. But we have got a really good network of libraries where there are lots of activities going on for early years and older children, and the staff are really relational. They enjoy helping people and providing information and access to support. And so they've involved a whole network of libraries into their local family hub network so that families can go into a library and find out what's available to them. In Sefton, they were struggling to find out where were the families that needed help. We heard earlier about how some families just can be really difficult to help. They're scared, they're worried about being judged. How do we access those families? So in Sefton, they decided to build relationships with their primary and secondary schools and go into the schools to deliver programmes. This was a win-win for both the schools and Sefton Council and the families, because it meant that the council could identify those families that needed help and actually build the trust in the setting of the school where the families were happy to be. Then you've got Essex. The challenge in Essex was the massive demand for mental health services. And of course, that's not just Essex, is it? That's across the country. And they were thinking, well, how do we help support children and young people? They'd also got a large number of children who are persistently absent from school. And as you know, this is a big issue post-COVID. So what did they do? Well, the Family Hub staff were commissioned to actually deliver mental health support through the schools and actually go in and working with the school nurses to not just support the young people, but to actually coach the staff in how to work with those children, young people, to keep them in school. So providing a triangle of support with the parents and families and the schools. And then there's Suffolk. In Bury St Edmunds, they were struggling to get families to come into the children's centre. The parents at the local estate were very suspicious and they really didn't want to cross the threshold. But what they discovered was that there was a church, the Bridge Community Church, quite close to the estate, where they'd been working with these families for quite a few years. There was real trust there. The families loved going in. There were loads of good activities going on, and they were really happy to engage with the family worker there. And so the council and the church have worked together to build on those relationships, and the council is coming in to the church facilities to help engage with those families, to help those families get the help that they need. And lastly, we've got Salford, where they were really struggling, realising that lots of families had issues with their housing. You can try and solve all the other problems going on in a family, but if they're really unhappy and they can't work out how to cope with the housing system, what can they do? The early help workers there were struggling too. They were saying, well, we don't understand how housing works and we can't really find out what's going on and we don't know how to help. So what they did was they actually decided to develop their strategy of bringing the housing team into their early help work. And so now an early help housing worker is in their multi-agency working in their meetings and is also coming and just sitting in the early help team once a week so that they build those relationships. and the early help teams building their understanding of how housing works. So those are some examples of how joined up thinking is helping local councils actually solve the problems that they need to solve. And I think what I'd like to end on by saying is that I think we are well now on our way to winning the hearts and minds of the councils across the country, whatever their leadership, in realising the benefits that family hubs can bring them. But this is only the start, and we need to hang in there and build to make the most of all the opportunities that we have ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, I thought four great speeches there, which I think certainly livened us up, I think. So now we've got Q&A for 25 minutes or so. So we could... This gentleman here, first of all. Nope.
Thank you. That was a really interesting discussion. My name's Michael Green. I'm Cabinet Member for Health and Wellbeing at Lancashire County Council, so the fourth largest council in the country. Unfortunately, we weren't successful in receiving government funding in the first wave, but I'm pleased to say that we actually launched our Family Hubs network last week. So we opened 12 centres right across the county from Monday to Friday of last week, and are very keen on this as a way of moving forward with this, and would welcome some further dialogue in how we can take these forward. But I'm also wondering whether there's any way that there will be any further government assistance in terms of funding moving forward, because it's an agenda that we are keen on supporting the government on, because we see it as a way forward to make a real difference in terms of the best starting life for children moving up to the age of 19 and beyond for people with special needs.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Well, look, well done on setting one up, and it was great. It was great to hear that from Catherine as well. Look, our aim is to have them in every single area. There is no imminent plan for another wave of them. We're trying to get the 75 up and running, and they are all doing they're pretty much on course. There's a sort of small handful we're pushing a bit, but they're pretty much on course. So nothing I can tell you right now, but certainly the aim is to have them all over the countrywide.
Okay. Yeah.
And we want the evaluations as well, don't we, David?
We do. Yeah, we do want the evaluations, and I think, look, a lot of what we're doing is slightly to digress, but we're doing family hubs. We're reforming the special educational needs and alternative provision system. We're reforming the children's social care system. We're making a big change in the childcare entitlement and so on. And with each of them, we're sort of testing and learning. So actually doing half the areas in the country is much bigger than most of the testing we're doing for some other programs. I'm sorry you didn't get one. I wasn't party to the scoring, though I know it was quite rigid. But yes, we do want to know that they work as well.
Emily Frith from Adoption UK. Family hubs were established because of the really strong evidence about the importance of family and early attachment. Adopted children often have really difficult early starts in life. I was speaking to an adopted person this week who told me that he'd met his third mother at the age of 4 weeks. So it's really, really important we get this right for adopted children and other care experienced children. One of my concerns about family hubs is that when you are adopting, you may not get the child in the family until they're aged 3 or 4, maybe even later, and that can be the same for kinship carers or foster carers. They may not go for the early years support in a community. They might not go to the baby events at the library. So it's really important we can think of other ways of reaching out to families in those situations. They also might feel stigmatised by some of the challenging behaviour that children who are traumatised may display. So would the panel agree that it would be useful for family hubs to have specialist work or other ways of connecting into regional adoption agencies or local authorities, care experience professionals to have that expertise within the hubs?
I could start just a quick one, just to say I completely agree. There is expertise out there with supporting parents, newly adopted parents. Sadly, it's fairly sort of small expertise from what I understand as well. And somehow we need to grow that. And I think it's brave of the government actually to say, yeah, we want to look at parenting, but there are some fantastic research studies and research models which can really help with what good parenting looks like. And that applies to any child, whether they're adopted or not. So seeing that embedded within a family hub, I think, will be absolutely crucial. But I think Catherine might have more.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the reasons why it's so important that family hubs is 0 to 19 and to 25%, because you never know when you're going to encounter challenges with children and in your parenting, and therefore we need a seamless transition between the different stages of parenting so that you can keep on going back to the family hub and get the help at the right time. When you say connecting with specialist services, the one thing I would add is that obviously, hopefully this came across from the panel as a whole, is that family hub policy, family hub networks, when it works best, is about that connectedness. So it's about connecting people to the right services and support. And if you go into a family hub, one of the things you need is not just a relational culture, but people working there who have a knowledge, an extensive knowledge of what is out there in the local community, but also nationally. I mean, obviously post-COVID, we've seen, because of that digital engagement, we've seen far more local charities delivering services in different parts of the country as they can through online delivery. So I know, for example, there's a small charity that specialises in children with ADHD, and the lady who runs it is now working with families all across England and beyond. And the other point I'd like to make, which connects to Lancashire, is that some of the best family hub implementation is where they've really thought through the connectedness. How do we make this work? It's not just a one-off, let's count up everyone who's out there, because the services, the people are always changing. You need a system, and Lancashire has got a great approach. So if anyone wants to learn how to do that, do speak to Lancashire.
Sorry, and can I just add as well? I think you make a very good point, because one of the other areas, looking at this from a family court lens as well, is special guardianship orders. And I know, because we've had quite a few SGOs through our charity, there's not enough support for the SGOs at all. So I think that's a really important point about linking the family hubs, because the family can be quite big, and it's the extended family. Sometimes grandparents become the main caregivers. So I think your point is well made.
Lady in green. Oh.
Thank you. I'm a GP from Wolverhampton and also the safeguarding lead for our group of practices. So I've seen firsthand the advantages of the 0 to 19 hubs. They're a fantastic resource that we have, and we feel privileged to have them. The only concern I have is the children we see who aren't attending school for whatever reason. So we have a lot of travelling families. Also the children of migrant families who are yet to be placed or haven't been given a school that's appropriate, so they're waiting to be placed. I feel that those children are very vulnerable and also seem to be invisible to a lot of services unless they self-present to a service. They don't really have access to those services. So I guess I would like to see sort of greater provision to ensure that children who aren't in education, there is a deadline, in want of a better word, for those children to be to have an appropriate placement, to be put in the education system, but also more support for families who find it difficult because of language barriers or social barriers to access those services and self-present.
Thank you. Well, Minister, perhaps, you're the Minister for Children. There are quite a few children that seem to disappear through cracks. In this case, what's your thinking on that?
Well, look, let me just say something about both. I think, I don't know whether it's by having a dedicated worker, but I certainly think that family hubs should absolutely be well connected to adoption services, foster services, kinship services, because going back to what I said in my introduction, of course we want children to be able to stay with their families where they can, but it isn't possible in some cases, and we need more of all those things. We need more foster carers, we need more people who will adopt, It's a good thing that's just launched in the Northeast, Foster Northeast. 12 authorities have all come together to try and increase the number of people who get to the point of fostering, because we get lots of inquiries and very few people then end up doing it, as you know, and we've got to try and sort those issues. On your point, I mean, again, I think this is where we want, we're trying not to be too prescriptive about what each family hub does, and I think that's been a strength, because as you heard from Catherine, each one is approaching things in a different way. But again, I think that where family hubs do recognise that's a need in their area, that is something that they should be supporting. But by the way, I mean, not just, as you say, you know, sort of traveller children and migrant children, but also the children who, post-COVID, have not gone back to school. And I've been having that conversation with a lot of people, because again, if we're going to solve that, we cannot solve it without knowing what's going on in the family and trying to support what's helping in the family. So not just for those groups, the broader issue of non-attendance we've got to try and cover.
You were wanting a question earlier on.
Hi, I'm Ava Berry from the National Children's Bureau. I'm a policy manager there. We're very much in favour of the Family Hubs initiative. We think it's brilliant, but we're quite concerned about the workforce shortages across much of the children's sector, and we'd just be keen to hear from the panel what some of the solutions could be to improve that.
Workforce shortages.
You go first. Okay.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Yes, I think it's been very interesting watching how local authorities have developed the teams that they need for their family hubs. And this has led to lots of new job specifications and lots of a big push for recruitment. And of course, as you say, they're all looking at the same time to get people on board. But in fact, I think in some ways, getting the right team together is about starting with looking at who you've got, and reworking and rethinking through how that works, and then identifying what the gaps are. I understand why we are recruiting people to simply implement a programme that's funded for 3 years, but actually I think that the biggest issue is making sure we've got those workers, those staff in the longer term who are creating the links in the system. And so we really need to prioritise which staff we're aiming to recruit.
Yeah, I'd add to this and say that we certainly in the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, and I'm seeing this on my own practice, I'm extremely worried about the children's workforce. I have to be very, very honest that we were incredibly disappointed in the NHS workforce plan. 92% increase for adult nurses, 0% for children's nurses. And children's nurses go on to do lots of different things. Once they've worked often in our hospital, they become the health visitors and the people out in the community, nurses that do a lot of this work. And we are struggling. Sometimes I go into my unit and there is only enough nurses to staff half of our intensive care beds. And that's a nursing crisis, that. It's happening year on year. I don't know where this has come from, and this workforce plan, but I suspect, as I'm going to be really brutal here, too often over recent years we have seen sound initiatives, really good thinking, but with no thought for children and left behind until somebody says, hold on, what about the children? And it's very easy to understand. I have some sympathy with it, because as with an elderly population, and I'm approaching it fast myself, you do start to get ill. Lots of elderly people, in fact, most of them have a chronic illness and a need, and it's huge, and it's a big problem. But we've taken the eye off the ball. We really have, and we need to put it back on. And I think family hubs are a great example of what can be done when you think proactively and you plan and you pull people together. Sadly, that hasn't happened for workforce, so I think it is going to be a pressure. And I certainly know of nurses who've left my hospital to work in a family hub, and are then struggling, our matrons are struggling to find people, to cover the shifts. And It's really tricky. It's really tricky and incredibly disappointing when we see this. So, of course, we're not going to give up, though. We're going to keep fighting for that. And, of course, you can't just think in silos, too. It's not just about children's nurses, children's doctors. We have to look at our workforce as a whole, our therapists, and there are many other workers who can support children as they go through illnesses or as they go through the ups and downs that life throws at them as well. So I think Family Hub's a step in the right direction, but I think you've hit the nail on the head here. It's going to be tough if we don't also follow this with not only a workforce plan of some sort for children and young people, but a sort of training plan as well. Thank you.
Gentleman in the corner there.
Hi, I'm Stephen Kingdom from the Disabled Children's Partnership. We know that families with disabled children, the parental breakdown is a higher rate than other families, and we know that's a direct result of lack of support and lack of services. And only 1 in 5 families of disabled children tell us they get the support they need. And often when support is provided, it's inappropriate, so parents being sent on parenting courses that really aren't appropriate for their children and their children's needs. Or worse, it comes from a child protection lens, and parents, the great research by Leeds University into parental blame and institutionalised parental blame, where parents, their needs are assessed through a safeguarding lens. In a way, I mean, comparing with adults, if you need adult social care, you don't start with the assumption that the adult is at risk, but actually when disabled children, families are looking for social care support, services do actually approach them in that way. So we've actually got some optimism that family hubs may be part of the answers, but I'd really like to hear from the panel how family hubs will ensure that the right support is there and available for disabled children and their families.
That's a really interesting example that you give, and I think the first thing that comes to mind is that family hubs is about finding the right solution for the family and having that whole family approach. Creating a culture where you look at the family and you look at all the influences in the home and what's affecting the child, and rather than thinking what program can we pop this family on, actually thinking how can we actually achieve better outcomes for this child and the family. And so it brings us back down to just the core of the concept, really. And I think workforce training is so important here. We were talking just now about workforce, and I think those local authorities that have been delivering family hubs for a while, and those which are beginning to as well, are putting a lot of thought into workforce training, bringing cross-sector stakeholders together so that they can be trained together in understanding how you support families better, how you take a trauma-informed approach, how you really ask the right questions to understand what a family needs, and take an approach where they don't feel judged or criticised for what they're doing. So I would hope that the cultural change of family hubs will help families with disabled children where the pressure on parents is so much greater. So that will go some way. But the other thing is actually having that connectedness with the right services. And that's where we need to see local authorities really making sure that their job is not just about acquiring knowledge and information themselves, but ensuring that everybody in the network understands what is available locally, or at least providing ways for families, for practitioners to access that information. And the Department for Education is in the middle of a Growing Up Well project, which has developed some digital tools to help local authorities keep a record and make contact with the relevant services within the area and beyond. And I think that would probably help. I don't know if the Minister can explain or help any more on the Growing Up Well Fund and how that's.
Well, I think what I was going to say is that it has to be taken in tandem with what we're doing on SEND reform, because I was talking about this morning, but you will know this big battle that parents feel they have with the system to get the support their children should have. That support should often come a lot earlier than when it does come. If it did, some of those children would be able to get that support without any HCP. I mean, I'm telling you all the things you know, but these things have to be taken together. So part of what the SEND reform is doing is to make sure that children with special educational needs get that support earlier, that we have national standards for the support that's given. and that we have better trainings. I mean, advice and guidance for parents, to your point about family breakdown, yes, but also for staff in schools. If you look at the course we've done for primary schools, incredibly popular, this course. You know, we ended up expanding it because there was such demand from schools to have that. And then I think you have to have it work well with family hubs like everything else, because they are the sort of shop front, if you like, for people to access all the sorts of services that they need. We won't fix the SEND system issues through family hubs, but hopefully what we're doing on the SEND system will be something that family hubs find easy to access.
So I was just going to add, actually, this boils down to holistic, person-centered planning as well. But my worry, being I think one of the charities on this panel, is also local authorities and those family hubs need to be engaging with the voluntary sector as well to see what provision there is out there. My concern is that they don't. Now, we are lucky as a charity that our local authority is engaging with us and we're engaging with others. But I also know that we know there are other organisations out there in the voluntary sector that are not being engaged with. So I think there's a conversation and dialogue to be had with your local community and making sure that all local voluntary sector organisations are tapped into those conversations around person-centred planning and holistic planning as well. Otherwise, you could miss a resource that's going to be valuable.
I was just going to add as well, because it's a topic of passion that I have. There is an increasing number of children with complex medical problems. Our children's hospitals are becoming champion at looking after them and getting them through some of the most traumatic experiences you could ever wish to go through. And if you're a parent watching that, is incredibly difficult. And they come out the other end, and we've got to deal with them and try and support them as they leave hospitals and go into the community. That's where we want them to be. So the numbers are a problem, but it can be done. So a little example of some good stuff. A couple of examples of of things that can be done. So first of all, a few years ago, we realised with children who were spending a lot of time in hospital with complex care, we were running into conflict with their parents quite a lot. Sadly, every once in a while it breaks out so badly, you hear it in the news. It's not what anybody wants, and it causes a lot of problems. We realised, once we'd done some digging into this, there was multiple reasons for it. One of them was financial, because these parents were becoming an incredible financial burden. We made a deal with the Citizens Advice Bureau, and we invited to come into our children's hospital, and we employed them. We gave them money to come and sit in our children's hospital twice a week and do a ward round. They did a ward round, and over a year, they extracted out of the benefit system that wouldn't have been extracted £1 million for the parents of our children. It was phenomenal. We've carried it on. Of course, that's the power of a children's hospital. We have charity money. We were able to do that. Not every hospital is as fortunate as that. That led us to think more deeply about it, and we've now got a model of social prescribing, which we hope will also link to our family hubs. Again, it's been run off charities where we've got key workers who are starting to connect across the North East and North Cumbria to know the resources out of the voluntary sector organisations, so that when children who've been through a traumatic experience and maybe need a lot of care when they go home, they have a lot of disabilities, that we can connect them smoothly, quickly, efficiently, so that there's a softer landing when they get out there. So I think there are things that can be done. How do you make it permanent, though? How do you systematise it? Again, I come back to family hubs. These could be fantastic resources of information in a gentle and compassionate way that help families land back into their community in a really positive way.
Thank you. We have time for two more questions. The lady here and the lady there. So, the lady here.
Thank you very much. Lynn Perry, Chief Executive at Bernardo's, the children's charity. We are very supportive, of course, of the Family Hub's agenda, and I'm delighted to hear you highlight a couple of the areas where we are involved in Family Hub work, including Essex and the Isle of Wight. We did some cost-benefit analysis on our Isle of Wight Family Hub work, and for every £1 invested in the Family Hubs, there was a saving of £2.60. And over the course of a year, that equated to £1 million savings to the local authority. So I think it's very clear that there's both a fiscal and a human benefit from investing in family hubs. And whilst we welcome the opportunity for more to be created, of course, we would like to go further and faster, notwithstanding the things that people have said about workforce. Last night we hosted a reception with the 5 largest children's charities in the UK to call for change. And I just wanted to echo the point that Mike made about how important it is that children are at the heart of policy and the choices that we make about future investment. And we would really welcome the opportunity to speak to the Minister further about some of those calls. Just want to share one final reflection and perhaps question for some feedback on. You know, we are talking here about integration in our communities. I think one of the things that I would urge is also thinking about how do we take every opportunity to join up thinking across government departments about investment in children and their future, including in family hubs. Thank you.
Joined up.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, firstly, happy to talk. Obviously, the Big Five talk to the department a lot. So, you know, I know we will have those. Conversations. The silo point, which you know a few people have made, I'm afraid this is endemic in government, and it was when I was running charities, and it's also nothing to do with children's policy. It's endemic to every area of policy because governments around the world, and it's not particular to the UK either, governments around the world have departments that protect their turf, frankly, and there isn't much incentive to pool resources and pool expertise or have ministers roam into other departments. So we have had some successful interministerial groups here. Family Hubs actually is a good example of a policy, you know, involving the Department for Health, involving the Department for Levelling Up and so on. But there is an institutional problem in governments around the world that they do work in silos. And I agree with you, we want to break that down. But 'twas ever thus. People have been saying that for decades, I'm afraid.
Hi, Janet Fisher, Chief Executive, Live Music Now. We're a national music and health charity, and we work in 20% of the special schools in the country. How, given that we've talked about what Nav has said, and that this joined up way of working is so important, how is it that the Family Hub network can facilitate those charities, and let's please drop the voluntary sector title, we're not volunteers, how can we actually start facilitating that ability to work at scale? Our colleagues in the Big Five are super generous across the line. We're all after the same outcomes for children and young people. How do we make sure that the capacity in our charity sector is actually amplified by the work that's going on in the family hubs, so that we're able to connect in? Because there's some amazing work going on the ground, but we in charities don't often have a lot of extra capacity to be able to come in. So, you know, we and many other arts charities, for example, could be working in a cross-lateral way across all of the family hubs, but we don't have the resources to be able to be making new connections with 42 ICBs and 75 family hubs because we're busy already oversubscribed in the work that we do. So how is it that we can sort of take a bit more of a strategic approach to including the third sector as part of this process?
I'll go for. I'll just quick one on just in practical examples. I think it's probably hard to do at really big scale nationally, but maybe it can be done. But the examples I have in the northeast are very much by knowing your network, knowing who's there, and creating a relationship. Something about relationships and actually knowing people from different charity organisations or from health or from educational organisations, and being able to work together. It's a strange experience watching a project grow that involves people who've not worked together before, and building those relationships and watching over 6 months, a year, and it to grow into something that you never would have dreamed of. So the example for me was my Middlesbrough kids, who are now having holiday sort of lessons from some of the top dance instructors that we have in the north of England. Just would have never happened before because people from Middlesbrough don't go and watch the ballet. Now, they're not doing ballet, they're doing movement, they're doing dance, they're doing lots of different things. And it's making them also have a conversation while they're there too. So I think that project grew out of a partnership. The funding came separately, and I think I have sympathy with the charity sector because often you're on this short-term funding. It was a project for 3 years. What happens after 3 years? And I think that's a real challenge. But at least we've done it, and we've established the principle we can do this. So I think it's something about knowing those relationships at local scale is really important to sort of giving this a go. It's not really answered your question about how you sustain it, and I don't know how you sustain it, but I think it can be done.
I think it's such an interesting question. We find, you say that you organisations haven't got the time. Well, I think local councils would say to you, we don't have the time either. And what you've got is people with not enough capacity to be able to spend time investing in relationships. And I come back to Lancashire again, actually, because what Lancashire is doing to encourage engagement from the voluntary sector is what do they say it? What's the phrase you're using? It's working out in the open. So what they've done is they've created a platform where anyone who's interested in their family hubs and wants to take part can log in and become part of the conversation. And so the Lancashire County Council is not taking responsibility for keeping everybody updated, but is saying, come on, join us, be part of it. I mean, I think you're raising a really good point that we are encouraging local authorities to engage with the voluntary sector from the first, but there can be a tendency to say, oh, we'll do that when we've got everything else going. But actually, if you really want to increase capacity, you need to do it from the start. So we need to make those noises. I think using local infrastructural voluntary sector organisations is a great way to help reach everyone, to build that sense of community. I think the other thing we see where it's working well is where local authority and voluntary sector organisations work together to get funding, because often the voluntary sector organisation is eligible for funding, but the local authority isn't. And so they come together, and that's working really well in several local authorities. And the last point I'd make is that councils have strategic visions, and they know what their priorities are. And a great way for family hub networks to make an impact and to stay relevant locally is to demonstrate how, through working together through family hub networks, they are impacting the local needs that have been identified by the council. So that's the way we're seeing it working. That's not a great answer for national organisations, but that's how we're seeing it on a local level.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, I think we have to draw to a close there. Slightly run over our Q&A time, but I think it's been a really challenging, informative, wide-ranging debate on family hubs, and I hope you've all been challenged by it and educated through it. I certainly have. It's been very interesting, and I must thank the Minister for being with us, and for Dr. McKean and for Nav and for Catherine for their various skills and areas of wisdom. And I think it's been very good. And thank you all for coming. Thanks for some great questions. I just encourage you to go away and continually think family hubs. Sorry, I'm being whistled at.
Very simply, there's a QR code on your leaflets, the Family Hub Network leaflet, if you want to go to our website and find out more. Sophie, who's been an amazing camera woman, has got a sign-up sheet if you'd like to learn more. Or just stay in touch with the Family Hubs Network. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming.